Time had officially run out for Gabriel Costa. Chicago's most ruthless syndicate boss stood desperately in a boardroom reeking of blood and cordite, having already dragged out 12 entirely useless, highly paid interpreters. Just as the standoff with the bleeding hostage seemed completely hopeless, a terrified cleaning lady dropped her mop to the floor and began speaking flawless Chechen. The rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Apex Global Logistics building was the only sound permitted in the penthouse boardroom. Overlooking the glittering, rain-slicked grid of downtown Chicago, the room was a masterpiece of corporate sterility, sleek mahogany, frosted glass, and cold, polished steel. But tonight, the illusion of legitimate enterprise had been violently stripped away. Tied to a heavy leather chair at the head of the table was a man named Yuri Volkov. He was a ghost in the international underworld, a high-value broker who moved billions in untraceable assets across European and Asian borders. He was also the only man who knew the decryption sequence to a ledger that held Gabriel Costa's entire financial empire. Without that sequence, Gabriel's syndicate wouldn't just go bankrupt by sunrise, they would be exposed to the FBI, Interpol, and rival cartels. Gabriel Costa stood by the window, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit. He wasn't a brute. He was a second-generation architect of a highly sophisticated criminal enterprise, a man who preferred leverage over violence. But tonight, his legendary patience had fractured. "Try again," Gabriel said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute silence. Seated across from Yuri was Arthur Penhaligon, a seasoned linguistics professor and former UN translator. Arthur was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he clutched a digital recorder. He was the 12th interpreter Gabriel's men had dragged into this room in the last 6 hours. The previous 11, ranging from cartel-affiliated polyglots to kidnapped university academics, had all failed. "Mr. Costa, I can't," Arthur stammered, wiping his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. "It's not just that he's speaking Russian. He starts in a deeply localized Uralic dialect, then shifts mid-sentence into what sounds like phonetic Mandarin, but using Arabic syntax. It's a linguistic mosaic. It's designed to be completely incomprehensible unless you know the exact conversational cipher." Yuri, despite his bruised jaw and the steady drip of blood from his nose, let out a raspy, mocking laugh. He spat a string of harsh, guttural syllables at the professor, then smiled, his teeth stained red. "What did he say?" Gabriel demanded, turning away from the window. His right-hand man, Leo Navarro, unholstered a suppressed, heavy-caliber pistol, letting it rest casually against his thigh. "I caught fragments," Arthur whimpered, shrinking back into his chair. "He mentioned a clock. And a dog? No, maybe a wolf. It makes no sense, I swear to you." Gabriel sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Get him out of here." Leo grabbed the professor by the collar, dragging the weeping academic out of the boardroom and tossing him into the hallway with the rest of the discarded, terrified linguists. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, plunging the boardroom back into a suffocating, heavy silence. Gabriel walked slowly toward Yuri, leaning over the mahogany table. "You think this is a game, Yuri? You think because you can juggle dead dialects and syndicate slang, I won't just skin you alive and take my chances with the feds?" Yuri looked up, entirely unbothered. He replied in a rapid, melodic tongue. It sounded almost musical, heavily inflected with French, but twisted into something unrecognizable. He ended the sentence with a smirk, fully aware that no one in the room, or perhaps the state, could understand a word he was saying. Just outside the heavy oak doors, in the dimly lit executive lounge, Nora Jennings was trying to make herself invisible. Nora was 26, exhausted, and wearing a faded blue custodial uniform that smelled faintly of industrial bleach and lemon pine. For the last 2 years, she had worked the graveyard shift at Apex Global Logistics. She didn't ask questions about the men in expensive suits who came in at 3 a.m., or the occasional dark red stains she was instructed to scrub out of the luxury carpets. She just kept her head down, put her earbuds in, and collected her paycheck. She had to. The medical debt her mother had left behind after a brutal 5-year battle with cancer was a crushing weight that threatened to drown her every single day. But Nora had a secret. Before the debt, before the night shifts, she had been a ward of the international foster system, bounced between military bases and embassy households across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. More importantly, she possessed a hyper-associative linguistic memory. Languages weren't just words to her. They were colors, shapes, and mathematical patterns. She didn't just speak them. She absorbed their cultural rhythms, their slang, their deepest idioms. She spoke 8 languages fluently and could comfortably navigate a dozen more. She had been buffing the marble floors of the lounge when she heard the commotion. The door to the boardroom was slightly ajar, just a fraction of an inch, left improperly latched when Leo threw the professor out. Through that narrow crack, Nora heard Yuri's mocking voice. She froze, the buffer machine humming idly in her hands. She recognized the melodic, twisted French immediately. It wasn't just French, it was Haitian Creole, specifically a hyper-niche criminal argot used by gunrunners in Port-au-Prince, mashed together with a Russian Mafia idiom. Nora whispered the translation to herself, her breath catching in her throat. The wolf is at the door, but the hunter is already on the roof. She knew she should walk away. Turn off the buffer, take her cart, and take the service elevator down to the basement. Survival meant silence. But as she turned to leave, her elbow caught the edge of her metal cleaning bucket. It tipped over. The heavy, galvanized steel crashed against the marble floor with a sound like a ringing church bell, spilling soapy water everywhere. Inside the boardroom, the silence shattered. What was that? Gabriel's voice snapped like a whip. Before Nora could even scramble backward, the heavy oak doors were violently yanked open. Leo Navarro stood there, his gun raised, his eyes scanning the empty lounge before locking onto the terrified cleaning lady sprawled on the wet marble floor. "Get in here," Leo snarled, grabbing Nora by the collar of her uniform and dragging her mercilessly into the boardroom. He threw her onto the thick Persian rug. Her knees slammed into the floor, the heavy bucket rattling as Leo kicked it aside. Nora gasped for air, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She kept her eyes glued to the intricate patterns of the rug, too terrified to look up. "A spy?" Gabriel asked, his voice chillingly calm as he stepped closer. "Who sent you? The feds? The Rossi family?" I'm just the cleaning lady," Nora stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "My name is Nora. Nora Jennings. I work for the contracted agency. I was just buffing the floors. I swear to God, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything." Gabriel knelt in front of her, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, calculating and devoid of empathy. He pressed the cold steel barrel of his gun under her chin, tilting her head up. "You're lying, Nora," Gabriel whispered. "You heard enough to know you should be running, which means you are a liability." Yuri, watching from his tied-up position, suddenly threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, grating sound. He looked at Gabriel, then at Nora, and spoke again. This time, the words were harsh, rhythmic, and guttural. It was Chechen. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He cocked the hammer of his gun, the metallic click echoing in the large room. "I'm done playing games. Leo, get the plastic sheeting. We're doing this the messy way." As Gabriel stood up, preparing to execute Yuri, Nora's brain went into overdrive. Her survival instinct, honed by years of living on the absolute edge of poverty and fear, suddenly hijacked her paralyzing terror. She looked at Yuri. She had heard exactly what he just said in Chechen. It wasn't a taunt. It was a timeline. 3 minutes, Nora blurted out. The room went dead silent. Gabriel stopped in his tracks. Leo froze, halfway to the supply closet. Gabriel turned around slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the trembling woman in the soaked uniform. "What did you just say?" Nora swallowed hard, forcing herself to push past the lump of sheer panic in her throat. He didn't insult you. He didn't say anything about the money. He said, "The ignorant sheep sleep while the shepherd sets the field on fire in 3 minutes." Yuri's arrogant smile instantly vanished. His eyes widened in absolute shock, staring at Nora as if she were a ghost. Gabriel stepped closer to Nora, his expression unreadable. "You speak Chechen." I speak a lot of things," Nora whispered, slowly pushing herself up to her knees. "But that wasn't just Chechen. He used a localized slang from Grozny. It means—" She hesitated, piecing together the linguistic puzzle. "It means he isn't waiting to be rescued. He's waiting for something to happen. Something explosive." Yuri strained against his ties, his face flushing red with sudden fury. He spat a rapid-fire string of words at Nora. This time, it was Mandarin, but heavily coded with triad gambling terminology. Gabriel aimed his gun at Yuri, but kept his eyes on Nora. "Translate, now." Nora didn't even blink. The languages were slotting into place in her mind like puzzle pieces. He said, "Shut your mouth, little rat, or the red dragon will eat your tongue." It's a triad threat. The red dragon usually refers to a high-caliber sniper tracer. Nora's own words caught up to her brain. A sniper. She remembered the Creole phrase she had heard through the door just moments before. The hunter is already on the roof. "Get down," Nora screamed, diving flat onto the rug. Gabriel, reacting with the honed instincts of a survivor, tackled Leo to the floor just as the reinforced, soundproof glass of the boardroom window exploded inward. A high-velocity, armor-piercing round shattered the mahogany table, exactly where Gabriel had been standing a split second before, showering the room in lethal shards of glass and wood splinters. The booming echo of the gunshot rolled across the Chicago skyline. The wind and rain howled through the shattered window, instantly destroying the room's temperature-controlled serenity. Gabriel rolled behind a heavy, overturned credenza, pulling his weapon. He looked over at Nora, who was curled into a tight ball, hands over her ears, surrounded by broken glass. Then he looked at Yuri, who was laughing maniacally despite being covered in superficial cuts from the shrapnel. "You see, Costa," Yuri yelled over the howling wind, switching seamlessly to perfect, unaccented English for the first time all night. "My people don't negotiate. They execute." Gabriel's eyes darted to Nora. His entire perception of the last 6 hours shifted in an instant. 12 elite interpreters with PhDs and cartel connections had given him absolutely nothing but stammering excuses. And a girl making minimum wage, wielding a mop and a bucket, had just deciphered a multilingual assassination plot and saved his life. "Leo," Gabriel shouted over the wind. "Secure the perimeter. Lock down the elevators." He crawled over the glass-strewn floor, grabbing Nora by the arm and hauling her up behind the safety of the credenza. She was shaking violently, a small cut on her cheek bleeding freely. "Look at me," Gabriel commanded, his voice intense but no longer threatening her. He gripped her shoulders. "You just saved my life. But if we are going to survive the next 10 minutes, I need to know exactly what else that man has been saying. Can you understand everything he speaks?" Nora looked into Gabriel's eyes, the adrenaline finally overriding her fear. She thought about her eviction notice. She thought about the endless, crushing debt. She looked at the blood on the floor, the shattered glass, and the dangerous, powerful man relying entirely on her. "Yes," Nora said, her voice steadying. "I speak 8 languages. I understand 12. I know every dialect he's using." Gabriel gave a short, grim nod. A dark, terrifying smile crossed his face. "Good," the Mafia boss said, "because you just got a promotion." The Apex Global Logistics building plunged into darkness. A fraction of a second later, the dull, amber glow of emergency auxiliary lighting flickered to life, casting long, menacing shadows across the ruined boardroom. The wind howled through the shattered glass, whipping Nora's loose hair across her face and scattering the useless translation notes of the 12 failed interpreters like dead leaves. "Elevators are dead," Leo shouted, bursting back through the oak doors, his weapon sweeping the dark corridor. "They've cut the main feed and the hard lines. We are boxed in, boss." Gabriel Costa didn't panic. Men like him didn't survive to rule the Chicago underworld by losing their nerve when the lights went out. He hauled Yuri Volkov up by the collar of his expensive, blood-spattered shirt, shoving the heavy muzzle of his pistol directly into the broker's ribs. "Stairs," Gabriel commanded, his voice slicing through the chaos. He turned to Nora, who was pressing her back against the overturned credenza, her hands shaking so hard they blurred. "You, Nora, stay right behind me. You step where I step. You don't speak unless I ask you to, or unless he opens his mouth. Understood?" Nora nodded numbly, her throat too dry to form words. She grabbed the edge of the heavy mahogany wood to pull herself up, her shoes crunching loudly over the sea of broken glass. They moved out of the penthouse in a tight formation. Leo took the point, his suppressed pistol raised, clearing the shadowy corners of the executive lounge. Gabriel dragged Yuri, while Nora followed closely, her eyes darting to every darkened doorway. The opulent silence of the 44th floor had been replaced by a terrifying, echoing stillness, broken only by the distant wail of sirens far below on the Chicago streets. They reached the reinforced steel door of the emergency stairwell. Leo pushed it open, the heavy hinges groaning in protest. The stairwell was a sheer drop of concrete and metal, spiraling down into the amber-lit abyss. As they began their descent, Yuri stumbled, deliberately dragging his feet. He looked back at Nora, his bruised face twisting into a malicious sneer, and muttered something in a low, raspy whisper. Nora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What did he say?" Gabriel barked, halting immediately. It was Sicilian," Nora stammered, her heart doing a painful gymnastics routine in her chest. "But archaic. Cosa Nostra old blood slang. He said, 'The bride wears red before she reaches the altar.'" Gabriel's eyes narrowed, his mind racing through tactical translations. "An ambush. They're waiting for us." "Wait," Nora said, her brow furrowing as her hyper-associative memory tore the phrase apart. In that specific regional dialect, the altar implies a place of sacrifice or the lowest point of a descent, the ground floor. But wearing red before, that means bloodshed prior to the destination. She looked down the dizzying spiral of the stairwell. "They aren't at the bottom, Mr. Costa. They're coming up to meet us. They're already in the stairwell." Gabriel looked at her, a profound shift occurring behind his icy blue eyes. It was a look of dangerous admiration. He shoved Yuri against the concrete wall, silencing the broker's smug laughter with a heavy forearm to the throat. "Leo," Gabriel said softly, "hold here. Level 40. They waited in suffocating silence. A minute passed. Then 2. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of damp concrete and old dust. Then Nora heard it. It was faint at first, the squeak of tactical rubber soles on metal grating, the metallic clinking of gear. It was echoing up from several floors below. Suddenly, a sharp, static burst of a short-wave radio echoed up the shaft. A voice spoke rapidly over the comms, distorted but audible. Nora closed her eyes, tuning out her own fear to isolate the cadence. "Pashto," she whispered urgently, tugging on the sleeve of Gabriel's ruined charcoal suit. "Mercenaries." The voice on the radio asked for confirmation on the package. "They are splitting up. 4 men taking the elevators through the maintenance shafts, 3 men taking the stairs. They just passed floor 35. 3 men, Leo muttered, checking his magazine. "I can handle 3. "No," Gabriel said, his mind calculating a new trajectory. "If they breach the maintenance shafts, they'll flank us by floor 30. We don't fight our way down. We go sideways." Gabriel grabbed Yuri and pushed him through the door of the 39th floor, a labyrinth of cubicles and unfinished server rooms. "Move!" They sprinted through the dark, cavernous office space. Nora's lungs burned, her legs aching, as she struggled to keep pace with the hardened syndicate men. They navigated the maze of desks and glass partitions just as the stairwell door behind them exploded off its hinges. Suppressed gunfire ripped through the air, shattering computer monitors and shredding drywall in a deadly hail of lead. Gabriel returned fire, pulling Nora down behind a heavy concrete pillar. "Leo, get us to the freight elevator. The maintenance override." As they scrambled through the crossfire, a mercenary stepped out from a side corridor, leveling a submachine gun directly at Gabriel's blind spot. "Left!" Nora screamed, acting purely on instinct. Gabriel spun, firing twice. The mercenary dropped, his weapon clattering across the linoleum. Gabriel looked at Nora, chest heaving. She had just saved his life a second time. Leo managed to pry open the heavy doors of the freight elevator with a crowbar from a nearby construction zone. "Cables are intact, but we have to manually drop the brake." They piled into the dark, greasy interior of the freight car. Leo ripped open the control panel, hot wiring the manual descent mechanism. The elevator jerked violently, then began to plummet in a freefall, the brakes screaming against the rails. Nora let out a terrified shriek, squeezing her eyes shut. Suddenly, she felt a strong, calloused hand wrap tightly around hers. She opened her eyes to see Gabriel standing over her in the dark. He wasn't looking at the ceiling, or at Yuri, or at the door. He was looking at her. His grip was an anchor in the terrifying plunge, a silent promise that she was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was his most valuable asset. The elevator slammed to a halt at the sub-basement level, throwing them all to the floor. The doors scraped open, revealing the cavernous, dimly lit expanse of the underground parking garage. 3 black armored SUVs were waiting, engines idling, flanked by Gabriel's heavily armed enforcers. "Get him in the trunk," Gabriel ordered, pointing to Yuri. Leo shoved the battered broker into the back of the lead SUV. Gabriel turned to Nora. She looked completely shattered, her uniform soaked, covered in drywall dust. A thin trail of blood dried on her cheek, trembling violently now that the immediate danger had passed. Gabriel took off his suit jacket, draped it over her shivering shoulders, and opened the passenger door of his personal vehicle. "Get in, Nora," he said quietly. "We have a ledger to decrypt." The safe house was a ghost property, an abandoned industrial meatpacking plant on the edge of the Chicago River, retrofitted into a high-tech fortress. Inside the reinforced steel walls, the air was warm, smelling faintly of ozone from the server racks and strong Italian espresso. Gabriel sat at a large steel table in the center of the room, rolling his shoulders to shed the adrenaline of the escape. Leo was pacing by the monitors, running facial recognition on the dead mercenaries left behind at Apex Logistics. In the corner, Yuri was shackled to a heavy pipe, his arrogant demeanor slightly fractured by the sheer brutality of their escape. But his mouth remained stubbornly shut. Nora sat on a leather sofa, clutching a mug of black coffee like a lifeline. She was still wearing Gabriel's expensive charcoal jacket. It was warm, carrying the faint scent of cedarwood and gunpowder. A syndicate medic had cleaned the cut on her cheek and placed a neat butterfly bandage over it. Gabriel walked over to her carrying a tablet. He stopped in front of her, leaning against the edge of a heavy desk. He studied her, really studied her, for the first time. Beneath the grime and the terror, he saw an intelligence that burned sharp and bright. "Who are you? Really, Nora Jennings?" Gabriel asked, his voice low, lacking its usual commanding edge. "A girl who mops floors, doesn't speak archaic Sicilian and Grozny street slang." Nora took a shaky breath, letting the warmth of the coffee ground her. "My mother was a linguist for the State Department. She was brilliant, but she made enemies. When I was young, she died. I was put into the system, bounced around military bases in Germany, embassies in Japan, foster homes in heavily segregated neighborhoods in New York. I had to learn how to communicate to survive, to know when people were planning to hurt me. She looked down at her hands. Languages are just math to me, patterns. I see the shape of the words before I hear them. And the cleaning job. My mother left behind $500,000 in experimental medical debt, Nora said bitterly. They seized everything. My degree, my credit, my life. I work nights at Apex because it pays under the table, and they don't garnish my wages. It's the only way I can eat. Gabriel was silent for a long moment. In his world, loyalty was bought with blood or money, but intellect like hers, that was unquantifiable. You're not going back to Apex, Gabriel stated softly. Your debt is gone. Consider it erased as of an hour ago. Nora's head snapped up, her eyes wide. What? I own the holding company that owns the debt collection agency, Gabriel said matter-of-factly. It's a stroke of a keyboard. You saved my life, Nora. I repay my debts. But right now, I need you to do something for me. Something no one else can do. He handed her the tablet. On the screen was a wall of seemingly random text. It looked like a catastrophic glitch. Cyrillic letters mashed with Arabic numerals, Latin prefixes, and Japanese kanji. This is the ledger's encryption wall, Gabriel explained. Yuri is the only one who knows the cipher. My tech team says brute forcing it would take 300 years, but Yuri has been taunting us all night. He uses language as a weapon, which means the password isn't a code. It's a phrase, a philosophy. Nora stared at the tablet. Her hyperactive mind immediately began to separate the noise from the signal. She recognized the phonetic structures hiding beneath the mismatched alphabets. Let me talk to him, Nora said, her voice suddenly steady. She set the coffee down and stood up, shedding the lingering remnants of her fear. Gabriel stepped aside, gesturing to the shackled broker. Nora walked across the room, stopping just out of Yuri's reach. Yuri glared up at her, spitting a stream of vicious, degrading insults in Albanian. He called her a street rat, a whore playing dress-up for a dead man. Nora didn't flinch. She let him finish, the silence stretching out in the room. Then she leaned down, locking her eyes onto his, and spoke. She didn't speak English. She spoke in perfect, flawless Albanian, adopting the specific, hard-clipped cadence of the Tirana underworld. A dog that barks from a chain is not brave, Nora said softly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. He is just loud. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, Yuri. You thought you could build a Tower of Babel and hide behind it. But your languages are messy. You rely on idioms, on localized slang, because you are a tourist in these cultures. Yuri's jaw tightened. The blood drained from his face as he realized she wasn't just translating. She was dissecting him. Nora switched seamlessly to Russian, her accent thick and authentic to the St. Petersburg docks. You spoke of the Red Dragon earlier, the sniper, and the bride wearing red. You obsess over color. You obsess over inevitability. She looked down at the tablet in her hand, then back at Yuri. The cipher isn't a random string of numbers. It's a poem, isn't it? A Russian fatalist poem translated into Mandarin phonetics, typed on a Cyrillic keyboard. Yuri lunged against his chains, a feral snarl ripping from his throat. Shut up! You know nothing, you little bitch! Gabriel took a step forward, his hand dropping to his weapon. But Nora held up a hand, stopping the Mafia boss in his tracks. She was entirely in control. "I know everything," Nora whispered. She looked at the tablet, her eyes tracking the chaotic symbols, translating them back to their root origin in real time. "The snow falls on the graves of the rich and the poor." "No, that's not it." She paced a few steps, her mind racing. "You used a Creole idiom earlier. The hunter is already on the roof. You like spatial dominance. You like the idea of looking down on people." Nora stopped. She looked at Yuri. Dominic Moretti. The name dropped into the room like a live grenade. Gabriel stiffened. Leo stopped pacing. Dominic Moretti was the head of the rival New York syndicate, Gabriel's most bloodthirsty enemy. "That's who bought you," Nora said, piecing it together from the dialects Yuri chose. The sniper wasn't Chechen. The tactic was triad, the execution was mercenary. But the financing, the Sicilian warning in the stairwell. "You sold Mr. Costa's ledger to the Moretti family." Yuri was hyperventilating now, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. Nora looked down at the tablet, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard. She typed out a phrase, translating the psychological profile she had just built into the twisted linguistic cipher Yuri had created. "The king bleeds out on his own throne while the beggar steals his crown." She translated it into Mandarin, converted it to Cyrillic keystrokes, and hit enter. The tablet screen flashed red. "Access denied." Yuri let out a wet, gasping laugh. "You're just a maid. You can't break my mind." Nora didn't blink. She thought about the Pashto transmission, the mercenaries in the stairwell. How did they know exactly what floor the boardroom was on? How did they know the power grid schematics to kill the elevators simultaneously? "They didn't just breach the building," Nora said aloud, her voice eerily calm. "They had a key. Someone let them in." She turned slowly, looking past Gabriel, past the server racks, directly at Leo Navarro. "You translated the Pashto wrong on purpose," Leo said, his voice suddenly void of all emotion. He slowly raised his suppressed pistol, aiming it directly at Gabriel's back. "You shouldn't have brought the girl, Gabriel." Before Gabriel could turn, Nora hurled the heavy ceramic coffee mug straight at Leo's face. The boiling black liquid splashed across his eyes, causing him to blind fire. The bullet shattered the tablet in Nora's hands, but the split-second distraction was all Gabriel needed. Gabriel moved with terrifying speed, drawing his weapon and firing a single, deafening shot. Leo crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the concrete. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gabriel stood over his former right-hand man, the gun still smoking in his hand. He had been betrayed by his closest confidant, sold out to his worst enemy, and saved for the third time tonight by a woman who buffed floors for minimum wage. Gabriel slowly holstered his weapon. He looked at Nora. She was pale, clutching her hands to her chest, staring at the body. "Nora," Gabriel said, his voice a low, rough rasp. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, the sheer magnitude of the violence finally catching up to her. "The cipher," Gabriel asked gently. "Did you figure it out?" Nora looked at the shattered tablet on the floor, then at Yuri, who was now trembling in absolute, unadulterated terror. "Yes," Nora said, her voice shaking but resolute. The password is betrayal is the only universal language. Gabriel walked over to the main server terminal, typed in the translated cipher, and hit enter. The massive screens on the wall flashed from an encrypted red to a brilliant, unlocked green. The ledger was secured. The Costa syndicate was saved. Gabriel turned around. He ignored the millions of dollars currently downloading onto his secure drives. He walked over to Nora, reached out, and gently wiped a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You don't just speak their languages, Nora," Gabriel whispered, the dangerous, intoxicating tension between them pulling taut. "You speak my language." The soft, rhythmic hum of the servers downloading terabytes of financial data was the only sound left in the room. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the safe house cast long shadows over Leo Navarro's lifeless body. Gabriel didn't look at his former friend. His eyes remained locked on Nora, who was standing tall despite the violent chaos that had just redefined her entire existence. Yuri was whimpering now, straining against the heavy iron pipes. The arrogant, untouchable broker had been broken by a woman who, just hours prior, had been scrubbing coffee stains out of a lobby carpet. "What happens to him?" Nora asked, her voice quiet but steady. She was looking at Yuri, feeling absolutely no pity. Gabriel stepped away from the terminal. "If I kill him, Dominic Moretti knows I'm tying up loose ends. But if I send him back to New York, Yuri becomes a walking message." Gabriel walked over to the broker, grabbing him by the jaw. "You are going to take a message to Moretti. You are going to tell him that his cipher was broken, his mole is dead, and if he ever sends heavily armed mercenaries into my city again, I won't send a message next time. I'll send a mortician." Gabriel signaled to the two enforcers standing by the steel door. "Put him on a private charter out of O'Hare. Make sure he's bruised enough to look convincing." As Yuri was dragged out, practically sobbing in relief, Gabriel turned his full attention to Nora. The adrenaline of the shootout was fading, leaving behind a heavy, intoxicating tension between them. He noticed how his oversized charcoal suit jacket dwarfed her, yet somehow she had never looked more commanding. "You can't go back to your apartment in Logan Square," Gabriel said, his tone shifting from Mafiaboss to something dangerously intimate. "Moretti's men might have had eyes on the building. You're entirely exposed." Nora crossed her arms, shivering slightly as the cold reality of her situation settled in. "So, what? I go into witness protection? Change my name and scrub toilets in Omaha?" A dark, genuine smile tugged at the corner of Gabriel's mouth. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile all night. "No. You are far too valuable for Omaha, Nora. You don't just understand dialects. You understand the psychology of the people speaking them. You deciphered a multi-million-dollar corporate espionage plot in a matter of minutes." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "My syndicate operates on 3 continents. We deal with Russian oligarchs, Sicilian traditionalists, and Colombian suppliers. I have an entire floor of analysts at Apex who missed what you saw. I need someone by my side who sees the board the way you do." Nora's breath hitched. She looked up into his icy blue eyes, seeing the raw, unfiltered power there. "You want me to work for you. I want you to partner with me," Gabriel corrected smoothly. "Your debt to the holding company is wiped. I'm offering you a new life, a penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria, a salary that makes your old debt look like pocket change, and a seat at my table." He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the uninjured side of her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the cold room. "But once you say yes, Nora, you are in this world. There is no stepping back into the shadows." Nora thought about her mother's medical bills. She thought about the brutal, exhausting nights pushing a heavy mop bucket while men in suits ignored her very existence. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, trying to survive the crushing weight of poverty and loneliness. She looked at Gabriel. He was dangerous, ruthless, and drenched in blood. But he was also the first person in her entire life who had truly seen her. "I don't want to hide anymore," Nora whispered, the final remnants of the terrified cleaning lady vanishing into the ether. "I'm in." 6 months later, the air in the private VIP lounge of the Geneva International Airport was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged cognac. Across the polished mahogany table sat a ruthless triad boss from Macau, accompanied by 4 heavily armed guards and 2 sweating interpreters. Gabriel Costa sat comfortably in a leather armchair, impeccably dressed in a navy Brioni suit, sipping a glass of bourbon. He looked completely relaxed. Beside him sat Nora. She was unrecognizable from the girl in the faded blue uniform. She wore a sleek, tailored crimson dress that caught the dim light, her hair swept up in an elegant, razor-sharp style. She exuded a terrifying, quiet confidence. The triad boss was speaking rapidly in Cantonese, his face flushed with anger as he slammed his hand on the table. His interpreters scrambled to translate his demands, softening his threats into diplomatic business jargon. Gabriel didn't look at the interpreters. He simply leaned his head slightly toward Nora. Nora didn't miss a beat. She leaned in, her lips brushing just centimeters from Gabriel's ear, the physical proximity a clear, possessive statement to everyone in the room. "The interpreters are lying to save face," Nora whispered, her voice a sultry, commanding purr. "He isn't demanding a higher percentage. He's panicking. He just used a regional slang from Macau that implies his supply lines have been compromised by local authorities. He needs our shipping routes desperately. Press him on the import tariffs. He'll fold in 2 minutes." Gabriel's lips curled into a wicked smirk. He turned his gaze back to the triad boss, his icy blue eyes flashing with predatory triumph. He knew exactly where the knife was, and thanks to the woman sitting beside him, he knew exactly where to twist it. Nora leaned back in her chair, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She had stopped cleaning up the messes of powerful men. Now, she was the one making the rules. If you love this thrilling mafia romance and want more intense, twist-filled stories, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends who love a brilliant, strong female lead outsmarting the underworld. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single pulse-pounding episode. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken Gabriel's deal? Let me know.